All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So, today we're going to talk about something almost everyone experiences, but few people fully understand. The big question: why are relationships so difficult? So, the concept: love is natural, connection is human, and if we're wired for bonding, then why does it so often feel confusing, exhausting, and painful? So, here's the honest answer. Relationships are difficult because they activate every unfinished part of us. They don't just bring up companionship or bring us companionship, they bring us face to face with our emotional history. And today I want to break down some simple concepts that I have found in my couples counseling process, which makes the experiential sense essentially come to you. So, one concept that I often find in couples counseling specifically is that relationships activate our emotional baggage. Everyone has baggage. Everyone presents with baggage at one time or another in relationships. The issue here is that when baggage shows up, we often don't know how to navigate it with our partner. So no one enters a relationship as a blank slate. We're going to bring several things with us. So, for example, we have an attachment history. We often have family scripts. We understand conflict differently and have different conflict experiences, especially growing up. Some of us bring trauma. Some of us has feelings and memories of rejection. Sometimes we have abandonment fears. We often have shame and other triggers that relate. And sometimes we have these protective defenses that tend to show up. And so you may actually think that you're fighting about dishes, which is something, or you may actually be fighting over who takes out the recycling bin. But you're not actually fighting about the dishes. You're not actually fighting about the recycling bin. You're fighting about the underpinnings of what that actually represents in your relationship. So, what you're technically fighting about is, do I matter? Am I safe? Will you leave? Am I enough? Or am I too much? And truly, that's the deeper layer that people often overlook when they're in conflict in relationships. And so most couples never really slow down enough to actually name that layer. They get distracted by the content. And unfortunately, the content often doesn't even get solved in of itself, because we often walk away feeling hurt, or one of us becomes defensive, or we don't feel heard. And that's really the deeper layer that people need to understand, is that we're often not just talking about these nuanced items of life, that we're actually activated and our partner's activated, and we have to take time to truly understand those parts of us and our partner, or you're going to find the relationship then becomes difficult. And so most couples never slow down enough to, like I said, name that layer. And instead, they continue to argue about that content instead of the process. And the process is what I often slow couples down to realize, is that the way that we're talking to each other, how we talk to each other, how we listen, and how we truly understand the emotions that are behind the contextual piece is actually the pathway forward to repairing and then eventually problem solving. And so, the second point is that conflict isn't the problem, the inability to repair is. And so this is critical because obviously conflict is normal. There's no such thing as a relationship without conflict. And this is especially hard for those who are conflict avoidant. And in fact, you never argue may mean someone is suppressing something, right? As an example, it can also mean that someone is avoiding. So we have our conflict avoidance, and then someone may also be afraid. And so, again, for those of you just tuning in, conflict isn't the problem. The inability to repair is. And this, again, is critical, and to be reminded that conflict is truly normal. And so if you're someone who finds yourself suppressing, or someone who is avoiding, or someone who's afraid, remember that there's a pathway forward for you, because healthy couples argue. But here's the difference. Healthy couples repair. Struggling couples escalate, or they're going to withdraw. And so when our needs are unmet in a relationship, people do one of two things. They're either going to fight, or they're going to run. And then obviously running can be avoidance and shutting down. So some phrases that people can often use to help and de-escalate is, if I get defensive, let me try that again. I see how that hurt you. Can I try that again? And I didn't mean to dismiss you. Can we reset? And so when repair is absent, when attunement is absent, this is where honesty can be perceived as aggression. And so this is where resentment begins to compound. This is often where distance increases, because we are now learning we cannot trust our partner as a safe environment to voice our emotional concerns. And unfortunately, those narratives become hardened. And over time, the relationship doesn't die from one fight. Essentially, it's compounded resentment, it's avoidance, and something that I'll often say to couples, which has also been quoted by John Gottman, who's an expert in relationships, is that couples are often 6 to 7 years late for therapy. And so that's a lot of compounding negative patterns. And so over time, the relationship essentially dies from 1,000 unrepaired moments. So this leads to the third concept, is communication. So when I work with folks, people come in and they say, we want to better communicate. And I say, okay, great. What does that exactly mean? Because from what I understand, you're doing a lot of talking. And couples who yell, couples who don't talk, and those are forms of communicating. But true communication is about emotional regulation. If you can't emotionally regulate, you cannot communicate. Most people think they have a communication problem. And what they actually have, second to what I said earlier, is they have a nervous system problem. Because when one person is triggered, one person is either going to pursue, the other one is going to withdraw, someone gets loud, someone shuts down, someone criticizes, somebody becomes emotionally unavailable. And that's not personality, that's protection. That's nervous system activation. And unfortunately, these protective patterns, or guardian modes, as I like to call them, are designed to do exactly that, to protect the person from harm. Not necessarily physical harm, emotional harm. And so what happens specifically is, like the adult brain, the critical thinking part of our mind goes offline. And so the attachment system begins to take over. And so now you're not talking as partners, you're actually reacting as wounded individuals. And until one of you, and obviously the goal is both of you, are able to regulate and pause and slow things down by saying, hey, I'm activated, let's slow this down. Without regulation, communication skills won't matter. And so my fourth concept that I wanted to talk about today is that previous scripts can run the show. And so we all carry relationship scripts. We weren't born yesterday. And so some of these scripts can be very harmful, but they are a part of our operating system. And we may not know it until it actually shows up and creates conflict. It's not uncommon for me to hear things like, if I need too much, I'll be abandoned. I hear that frequently in people's narratives, that if I ask too much, or if I'm a problem, this person may find me overwhelming and eventually leave me. Or love can be performative. So love means I have to perform, I have to sacrifice. Conflict to some people in their mind, the message is that conflict means we're doomed. It means that the relationship is over, it's going to be over. And so then that obviously is going to put someone's nervous system into an escalated state. Or if I don't control the situation, I'll lose my safety. That can often come from a previous script, a once upon a time, where control was actually the preventative to losing control of the safe environment. And so, or there's a script that often I hear is that I can't trust, I can't rely on anyone. And so obviously these scripts were adaptive at one time, but in adult relationships, they're going to distort the perception of what's going on. And so you don't respond to your partner, you respond to your interpretation of them and what's happening. And I'll often ask couples, and I ask you, when you take a step back, when you feel escalated, is what's the message? What message am I hearing or interpreting from what my partner is saying? And really, until those scripts are identified and updated, unfortunately, you'll keep reacting the familiar pain and recreating it. And so our name, and the other piece too, which makes, I find, relationships difficult, is that our needs change over time. So this is something I think people underestimate, because who you are when you're 25 is not who you are as a 40 or 50-year-old. Your needs are going to evolve. Emotional depth changes, stability, novelty, and security, especially intimacy or sexual expression, our sense of independence, our career ambition, meaning of life, these things change over time. And so if we do not have the capacity to communicate these very important needs with our partner, this is where we'll often see discontentment and detachment. And so as we grow and our needs develop, the relationship needs to grow too. And if the relationship doesn't grow, then one partner will ultimately feel constrained. And if growth isn't discussed, or if we don't feel that we have an environment to discuss it, this is also where resentment begins to grow silently. And, you know, people don't always fall out of love. Sometimes they fall out of alignment. Actually, I'm going to retract the word sometimes. They fall out of alignment. And when we fall out of alignment, we're no longer inputting these positive deposits into the relationship. And the other partner and ultimately the relationship will feel it. And so alignment requires ongoing conversations about who am I becoming, who are you becoming, and are we adapting together? And so most of us were taught, especially moving into this other concept that we were never taught how to relate. How to relate is that most of us are taught how to achieve, or how to perform, or how to succeed. And so we don't have a clear definition of how to repair, how to apologize without defensiveness, how to validate without agreement, how to express need without accusation, or how to sit in discomfort without escaping. You know, relational skills are developmental. And, you know, I have folks come into my office who are in their 60s or 70s and 40s, and they're still learning developmentally these relational skills. It doesn't matter how long the couple has been together. There's always more to learn. And most adults are improvising. And oftentimes it works until it doesn't. And so there's a reason why the inability to repair becomes the tipping point. And here's the hard truth. It's not betrayal that destroys most relationships. It's this chronic emotional disconnection that often will come way before betrayal or even infidelity. And so when these bids for repair are ignored, the hope is going to decline, safety, a sense of safety will decline, and these efforts will decline ultimately. And eventually someone says, I can't do this anymore. And what they usually mean is I haven't been seen, I haven't felt chosen, and I don't feel safe bringing my hurt to you anymore. And so really repair requires humility. It requires patience and attunement. It requires saying, My nervous system reacted, but I chose you over being right. And I'll often ask people, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Being effective, that's maturity. And so again, relationships are difficult. And the why behind their difficult is because they require several concepts of growth: emotional awareness, nervous system regulation, accountability, adaptability, the ability to recalibrate, even the courage to confront your own patterns, and the willingness to repair. Relationships aren't difficult because love is flawed. They're difficult because intimacy exposes what they haven't healed. And so, really, the good news is that difficulty doesn't mean dysfunction, it means growth is required. And so, healthy relationships, again, are not conflict free, they're not perfectly aligned, and emotionally effortless. They're repair oriented. They're curious instead of defensiveness. They're willing to evolve. They're honest about needs, and they're committed to staying in the conversation. So when conflict happens in your relationship, do you tend to pursue harder or shut down? And be honest with yourself, because this isn't about being right or wrong or admitting that. It's about awareness. And this helps you as a viewer identify your own nervous system in pattern in real time, in real life. Think about what was modeled to you about conflict growing up. Was it loud? Was it silent? Was there avoidance? Was there explosive? This concept is going to help you maybe take a look at where some of these patterns may have come from, and to examine your relational script. Ask yourself, after your last disagreement, did you repair, or did you just move on without resolving it? So thank you again for tuning in. If you relate to any of these concepts that we talked about with relationships, please tune in more for live video or streaming on my YouTube account. Obviously, you can follow me here on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in couples therapy or some sort of relational repair, please reach out to me. My website, www.paulsheasley.lcpc.com. Thanks for your time.